I'm going to invite Barry and Mason to come on up. Remind you that what we're doing tonight is not really a debate. We talked about that at first. We were all going to draw positions and try to debate each other, and then nobody wanted certain positions. So we decided, let's just model discussion. So that's what we're looking at tonight. And it's not necessarily going to be a Bible lesson like we normally do on Wednesday evening, nor is it going to be a history lesson on the politics of America. The purpose is not necessarily to persuade you to think differently, but maybe to consider different topics from a Christian perspective and really model what we learned on Sunday. Just as a quick reminder, we said this: consider your vote biblically, prayerfully, critically, and lovingly. That's where we left it on Sunday, and so we'd like to model that best we could. Some of these are going to be challenging, but we have spent time in prayer over this. We've been digging into the Bible to talk through some of these issues. We're going to challenge our own opinions, maybe even some of your opinions or each other's opinions, and we're going to do so lovingly. And so I hope that this creates something in you that says, you know what, I want to have these kinds of conversations. It's okay for Christian brothers and sisters to have these kinds of conversations. And so let's jump in by talking through a few guiding principles. What I asked these guys to do was name a couple of things that are overarching principles for when we approach politics. What are some things that always seem to be popping in for you? And then so we kind of split them up. Here are a few that came to my mind. The infallibility of Scripture is one. We often talk about biblical inerrancy, which would mean that the original text of Scripture is without error. Infallibility goes right along with that, but probably hits a little closer to what we're doing tonight. That means Scripture is 100% trustworthy, that we can trust it for guidance, for direction. And so I think that's a factor. I would argue that the Imago Dei, the image of God that we see in Genesis chapter 1, that every human being is created in the image of God, that factors into my politics heavily. The fact that I don't care where you are, where you've come from, your mental ability, your economic ability, you are created in the image of God. And I think that is important and a guiding principle for me. Another one is citizenship in heaven, that our citizenship is not ultimately in a nation or a kingdom here on earth, but it is in heaven. And then finally, that the government is created by or is a gift from God. We have to remember that concept, that we live in a society right now that many of us fear is heading in the wrong direction. But like I said on Sunday, you look at some of the kingdoms that the Israelites or the church had to be subject to. It is amazing how blessed we actually are. Let me read 1 Peter 2, and then I'll let Barry go on to his guiding principles. 1 Peter 2:13, or let me start with 11, actually, I think is what I started with. Beloved, I urge you as aliens and strangers to abstain from fleshly lusts, which wage war against the soul. Keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles, so that in the thing in which they slander you as evildoers, they may, because of your good deeds, as they observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as the one in authority, or to governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. For such is the will of God, that by doing right you may silence the ignorance of foolish men. Act as free men, and do not use your freedom as a covering for evil, but use it as bondslaves of God. Honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, and honor the king. To me, those are just a sample of what I would call guiding principles that I think are going to factor into a lot of the discussion tonight. Barry, what would you add?
I agree with you at the beginning of as far as the Bible, taking the whole of the Bible. And I think, we always should, as Christians, take the whole of the Bible, but also in context, right? When it talks about our personal responsibility, the church's responsibility, and the purpose of government and... Sorry, can't hear me? All right. So the whole of the Bible, but in context. When it talks about our personal responsibility versus the church's responsibility and the purpose of government and our response to government. A guiding principle to me is prudence, as talked about by C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity, where he defines prudence as practical common sense, taking the trouble to think out what you're doing and what is likely to come of it. So prudence. And then the last one probably is just understanding our unique position as part of the government. And then looking at the beginning of our Constitution, how was our government established and why? It says, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So those are kind of my guiding principles.
For me, and I'll say really about all of these initial guiding principles that we're talking about, whenever we get to talk about specific biblical issues, it's not always that we can draw one Bible verse that you can connect to X issue in 2020 in the United States, right? And so often we have to make decisions based off of the whole of Scripture, and that's sort of where these principles come in. The three that I put here, the first is something that Josh said on Sunday, understanding the big picture of things, who God is, what God is doing, like Barry mentioned, the role of government and our role in it. And really, as I'm thinking about this, we all make decisions every day as Christians where we don't always have all of the information to make the best decision, right? And the Bible may not clearly speak to something. If you remember from Sunday, the spheres that Josh had on the screen, what the Bible doesn't tell you what kind of job you should have, but it tells you what kind of employee you should be, that kind of thing. And so below that, what I mean by big picture is also that I think part of our political climate now is we want to make everything the most important thing, right? No surprise, the election next week is the most important election of our lifetime, just like the last one was, just like the last one was before that, just like the last one. I think one of the ways that we can guard our hearts is to trust God and understand that this isn't an important election. Maybe it is the most important election. We can't know, but we can trust God that He's in control and understand our place in God's universe and where He has us. That's what I mean by big picture. Second, therefore, role of the law. A lot of our understanding of morality from the Bible comes from a mixture of the teachings of the Old Testament and the New Testament. But also, we can't draw a straight line from the Old Testament to where we are now. I mean, the laws that we read in the Old Testament, if you think about what you might read in Leviticus, is there are categories of those laws. We can loosely categorize them as moral, civil, and ceremonial. And for us today, those moral laws, think of the Ten Commandments, are still in place for Christians today. But then there are other laws that had to do with ethnic Israel, and that's sort of the civil and the ceremonial laws that might not apply exactly to us today like they did to Israel. Now, they do give us a picture of God's character, what God cares about. And again, it's taking all of this together as we come up with a biblical ethic as we're reading the laws in the Old Testament, some of which you'll see tonight. And then this last issue is probably a big guiding principle for me around election time, and it's the idea of Christian liberty. The Bible talks about liberty all over the place, right? How Christ has set us free, not to put us back under a yoke of slavery. You can probably think of some verses for yourself. Do we have these on the screen, these next two? I'll read them since we've got them on the screen. Colossians 2:16 says, "Therefore let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to a festival, or a new moon, or a Sabbath." 1 Corinthians 10:23 says, "All things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up." And so really what I mean by this category of Christian liberty is there are things that the Bible is crystal clear about. And anytime that the Bible is crystal clear about something, Christians ought to be crystal clear about those things. There are other issues that the Bible is not so clear about, and Christians might disagree. And I think we err whenever we make those unclear things as if they were clear things, especially when we're talking about politics, political issues, especially back to Barry's point, when we find ourselves in the context of a two-party system. Those things don't always line up. And so it's around these times we see a lot of, especially if you get on Facebook, right? You see a lot of, if you're a true Christian, you will vote this way. And you might see that on either side. And let's pump the brakes on that, right? Because we're citizens of Christ's kingdom first, as Josh said, and the citizens of the United States second. And Christ has given us liberty to make decisions as the Holy Spirit leads us, especially in these gray matters.
I've just got one final thing to say. If the both of you keep preaching a sermon on every point, we're not going to get through
I
these.
didn't preach a sermon.
It was me. It was me.
That's my first zinger your way. I'm expecting them to come back.
Gotcha. We were worried about the three of us talking too long, so we're going to try to.
We're already 5 minutes ahead.
We're doing.
we're actually ahead
Don't
of schedule.
say that. That's famous last words.
Yes.
The first issue that we wanted to tackle kind of went along with guiding principles, and it's just a big picture question that I think helps answer a lot of the issues afterward. Honestly, I think this is where a lot of us might disagree, and that's the reach of government. How far should the government reach into our lives? And so this is kind of a big picture issue, but it also is, we've said it's an issue that we want to talk about. You don't really see any biblical texts that talk about that. But that is, on our political spectrum, I mean, if I can lay down my cards, if I had my, how do you Southerners say it, if I had my druthers, I would probably be libertarian, keep the government as far from me as possible. Let me live my life, make sure you protect us, those sorts of things. But then we've got that on one spectrum in our country, all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum of no, government is key. Government needs to be running everything. And so what we kind of wanted to open up and talk about, you guys, how do we know what biblical commands first of all, apply to the government versus us as individuals or us collectively as the church? Any thoughts on that?
You looking at me?
Yeah, you go.
All right. So I guess we have to go back again to, the role of government, right? And then our role in it. And something that is, again, as I mentioned, the uniqueness of our government and the fact that, this is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. So we, in a way, are the government. And I want to make one clarification to your sermon this past week.
Okay.
You said we're a democracy, which is partially true.
We're a republic, you're right.
Okay, we're not even.
I thought that too.
Yeah.
During the sermon.
Sorry, history boys.
But we're not even just a republic, right? A republic is like a representative form of government, right? We're a constitutional republic with democratic, kind of tendencies in there. And the fact that we do have ballot initiatives where it is pure democracy, right? An issue can be on the ballot and the majority wins that issue. The legislative, body, the Congress and representatives, they are our representatives, right, from each state. And they can make laws and pass those laws. But no body, even on those ballot issues or the Congress, can pass laws that go against the Constitution, right? And each one of those, I actually looked up the oaths this week for every one of the office, whether it's the president, the senators, or the representatives. They all have to swear an oath to uphold and protect the Constitution, and also the Supreme Court as well, right? So that tells me that it's the government cannot just do whatever they want. And talking about government overreach, especially when we're talking about this whole COVID-19 response. Some of the concerning things is, as a Christian, I care about other people, and I want to wear my mask, which I do have. It's down there, and I was wearing it until I got up here, right? I want to wear the mask to cover other, to protect other people because I care and love them. I worry, though, and I also want to do the social distancing, but when the governors can just make laws without abiding by the Constitution and going through a legislative process, that worries me that they're overreaching even the oath that they took to get into office.
Do you feel like they've done that?
I believe in a lot of instances, yes, they have. They've stepped over that. And but I think we've systematically gotten used to governors, presidents, through executive orders per se, actually passing pseudo laws.
I think that's one of the issues that we used it as because this is a big issue over top of all the other issues, is we can have biblically founded beliefs, but that also has to be filtered through the context of where we find ourselves. We happen to be citizens of the United States, living when and where we do, and that's always a balance of going back and forth there. I mean, we talk a lot. Really, all of these examples that we can think of the government's role and the government's reach is, to what extent does the government have a role in what we might call human flourishing? So if you Google human flourishing, Psalm 19 comes up a lot. Psalm 19 talks about how the government's role is to support the good and to sort of the government is a gift from God, right, according to the Bible, and instituted by God, everything that we would say. And so the government's role is to help us flourish and live good lives, and so that's where issues like COVID response comes into play, and you can sort of see issues on both sides of to what there's the freedom side on the one side of I should be free to do whatever I want, right? If I don't want to wear a mask, I don't have to wear a mask. And then on the other side is to what extent does the government have the ability to protect you from other people, especially during a global pandemic, that sort of thing. And again, that gets into the guiding principles that we've been talking about, is probably each one of us would fall slightly different on every issue that we could think of in government overreach. I mean,
I don't think we need speed limits.
So the fast driver has an opinion on that. Yeah, and we talked about speed limits is in that category. I mean, seat belts are in that category. What right does the government have to if I want to wear a seatbelt or not?
I've got a real quick case in point about the government as far as the COVID-19 response. This has been when it first happened, and the pandemic came out, and all the stores.
Make it sound like a movie.
Yeah, well, no, all the stores were being shut down. All the government, what do you call them? Orders were issued, or whatever you want to call them, were issued, and even like churches were told in a lot of states to stop congregating. And I remember I was picking up my son from work and coming back on a Wednesday night, and I saw a small church, and people were going into the church. They're obviously meeting when pretty much every other church was shut down. And I just told my son, I said, I think that pastor in that church might be ill-advised, or maybe not making the wisest choice about meeting at this time when this pandemic just first started. However, at the same point, I would fight for their right to do that, because I believe, the Constitution makes it very clear that the government cannot, impose or pass any regulations involving our freedom of worship. At the same time, I think as Christians, we care for one another and try to be wise in that as well.
It's a tough balance, and that's where I know some of you might even not have liked how DeWine handled it, our governor in Ohio, but I appreciated the fact that he urged us to not meet. He never passed a law, never said you cannot meet. He just said, I'm asking churches to not do this.
And I do think that's the government's role. They can
advise
and have
in
a
that
lot of
case,
data.
that was
and
nice,
follow the Constitution and the legislative process to.
So let me ask you specifically, Barry, do you think, well, no, Mason too, is it government overreach to ban recreational drugs?
Just like topic change?
No. This is still government reach.
The specific topic.
Mason,
I mean, you both of you waxed eloquently
I was thinking about COVID
about our freedoms, about all these things, but then when we shift gears and we say, no, I kind of like that they banned drugs.
Well,
I mean, how do you justify that in your mind?
I guess my key point too was also not that restrictions can be made, but they follow the prescribed constitutional path to do that in their legislative process, versus one person dictating, thus says I, therefore you do it, without going through our legislative process. When it comes to recreational drug use, I guess it's depends. What kind of drugs are we talking about? Kids chewing crayons, or
or we joked earlier about I have water in my mug right now, but if this were to be coffee,
right.
Caffeine is a legal drug that we can all take as often as we want. And so it's...
And I think that's where it gets tough. I think it's a balance of protection for society. I don't think that the government's job is to provide individual protection, if that makes sense, for each individual, but as a whole for society.
What I like about what you just said was, because I think this is applied inconsistently sometimes. Most of us would be against sugar bans, but we'd be okay with maybe a recreational drug ban. But what I like about what you said was that did it go through the process of legislation, and that's a good point. Whether it being an executive order of some kind, That's government overreach. But when we go through that, it's obeying our Constitution. That's a good example.
There's also the issue policy-wise of with bans like this of can it be systematically enforced? I don't remember much from my poli-sci college days, but one of the things I remember is that a just law has to be systematically enforced, meaning that it applies the same to everyone. And it's these types of issues, bans, that typically are not systematically enforced. I mean, a key example might be the prohibition, where Christians, personally may be against the use and overuse of alcohol, but a nationwide ban wasn't systematically enforced, where the average person wasn't allowed to have alcohol, but they're having drinking parties in the White House, right? And so it's often when these types of things happen, the elites, whoever they are, can still partake in these things that us common folk can't have, and that's just not a just law. And so, what'd you say?
I said healthcare.
Healthcare.
We had healthcare on the list because that's a hot button one, and it kind of gets to that next category of government reach is what about the good things they try to do, not just the bans, but what about welfare, government assistance, healthcare, those sorts of things.
That's good. One thing on the bans, though, going back to that, one distinction I would try to make is, when we talk about the sugar bans, I think they did that in New York. They're trying to do
the big gulps.
The big gulps. You couldn't buy a big gulp anymore. Who was that protecting? That was protecting the individual who wanted to drink a big gulp, versus I think some of the other drug issues. It's not just affecting that person. It actually provides a lifestyle of crime and other issues as well. So that's an argument you could make there as well. So it's not the protection of the individual for making stupid choices or bad choices. Or occasionally having a big gulp is probably not a stupid choice, but
not the greatest choice either.
Yeah, maybe not the greatest.
You could probably say like cigarettes are kind of in that category where cigarette laws have drawn the line where there's now no longer smoking sections in restaurants because it doesn't just affect you. It affects, I didn't mean to gesture to you. It doesn't just affect the person smoking. It affects everyone in the restaurant. But it's also not illegal to smoke cigarettes outside, right, where you're in the open air and it doesn't affect so maybe that's an example of where one of these laws sort of tried to strike the balance there.
So like I said, this issue I think touches a lot of the other issues that we're going to hit on real quick, because what is the government's role is a valid question, and we might find ourselves disagreeing as Christians, not on a biblical basis, but on saying, hey, that's not the government's job.
Right.
That's the individual's job, or that's the church's job, as I would argue when we talk about things like welfare or
So speaking of
care.
Welfare, since according to our schedule, we've got 2 minutes to cover.
I was hoping to get ahead.
He's trying to bank
I
time.
asked, but go ahead. I was
Okay.
trying to bank it. So you see what's next on the list.
I know. So welfare, I think, from my perspective, is whether it's the church. First of all, I think we've passed a lot of responsibility of the church onto the government. One of those things is, caring for the poor and the needy, right? And so we've passed that on. Hey, let's pass legislation to have the government do those things when it's actually the church's responsibility.
And I would say we were doing them. If you look at the foundations of education, healthcare, reaching out to the poor,
Public education.
all of that was the church. Right. And then I feel like, I don't know if I wasn't alive during the time, but a lot of that happened during the New Deal and FDR, and I don't know if the church abdicated their responsibility or the government took it. And so that might be a good question to look into.
And I'm not even pointing to the past. I mean, I can point to myself and
right now.
Yeah, right now, right. But I think you're right. No, I think you're right. The fact that I think there's this idea that the government is going to take care of those who can't take care of themselves, when actually it's the church's responsibility. And I don't think that Christians in general have dropped that, but I think that's a common mentality even among Christians that, hey, let's push for policies that allow the government to take more money, take more control, and to provide these services that the church should be providing. But regardless of whether it's the church caring for the poor or the government caring for the poor, anyway, we have to always think about, to truly love them, is loving them always giving them money? And we've all had to probably make this decision. I remember I had this wake-up call. We were supporting a person for a long time that had a really bad childhood but was an adult now and continually made poor decisions. And we helped them financially, off and on for a couple years. And finally we realized you continue to make these poor choices. The money is not helping you. Continually giving you money, you had to sit down and have that conversation. Hey, we're not going to give you any more money. It's not helping you. You need to make some life changes, some choices. So we have to come alongside these people and help them help themselves, not just
We actually
continue to
talk
give them
about that
money.
a lot at Pike Outreach.
Right.
We call it paternalism, is what you're actually conditioning them to be dependent upon you, and that's not what we want, for sure.
Right.
That is not the biblical example by any means. Let's go on to a couple more specific issues here, and this is a big one. This is one that several of you wanted to hear about, but we had on the list anyway, and that is the issue of abortion. What is the Christian viewpoint on that? Where does it come from? I think everybody knows the Christian viewpoint. If you look at Scripture, I would say there's plenty of evidence for it. We have a couple of examples of something that would be pretty close to mass abortion. You have Pharaoh and then Herod in the New Testament, infanticide, basically taking out an entire population of young babies at the time. When you look at our numbers right now, I was looking at the numbers the other day, and they are down, but we're still looking at 700,000 lives a year, which is just painful, so painful. When you look back at the law, if you want biblical examples from that, you've got just simply from Scripture, thou shalt not murder. You've got the consequences in the law for injuring a woman, and she loses her baby, that had consequences to it. And then I think what a lot of us lean on when it comes to pro-life ideas is Psalm 139, showing that God knows us from the moment of conception. For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. So when it comes to this idea of being pro-life, I think there is quite a bit of unity around that in Christian circles. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm going to assume most people in our church, 90 to 95%, lean this direction of being staunchly pro-life. And I know all three of us up here do. In fact, we've kind of talked about, okay, who wants a counter position on this? Because it's just hard to make a biblical case against being pro-life. But there are a couple of key questions that I think now face us as Christians. So we're moving forward with the idea that most of us are in the same boat of being pro-lifers to some degree, of being against abortion. So the questions I kind of have for you guys, can a Christian, is it within Christian liberty to be pro-choice? Or would we say leaning in that direction makes us question your fruit, makes us question, I don't want to say that any more harshly, but you know what I'm saying.
So I have a lot of friends who would put themselves in that category, who
Christian and
they would
pro-choice?
They would say that they were Christians, and they would say something like pro-choice, anti-abortion, something like that. And so the idea is that, and again, it's the issue and the policy. Sometimes they go together, and sometimes they don't. And so they might point to evidence that in places where abortion is legal, it might happen less and more safely than in places where it is illegal. And the argument that someone's gonna, if somebody wants to have an abortion, they're gonna have it anyway. They're just gonna have it in a more dangerous abortion that puts the mother's life in danger as well, that sort of thing. And then they'll also often point, obviously if we're talking pro-life, pro-choice, those line up pretty well with two political parties nowadays. And so often those people are Democrats who would say, that it's important to care about all of life. And so they would be more likely to support, welfare and systems like that for poorer people who are more likely to have abortions, and point to the type of woman who gets an abortion is often the person who, has kids already and is worried about is worried about being able to support another kid. And so it's also getting to the idea of I think some people approach abortion lightly, and we should all be against that. There are some people who really struggle with this decision, whether or not to have this baby. And one last thing I'll say is, with this issue, we have such a divide in our country today, and it's often a soundbite divide, right? Where everyone takes the worst argument from the other side and argues against that side. Where I think if we think about the individual woman who's considering having an abortion, often a very hard decision. And so, from a policy standpoint, and as Christians and as a church, how can we come alongside that woman, encourage her that this is a life inside of her, and support her, more adoptions by Christians, that sort of thing. That's why we support people like Elizabeth Hope, perhaps.
I was going to say, plug another local local organization here, Elizabeth Hope. That's exactly what they're doing, is trying to come alongside women who are hurting. I've also heard people make the case that this is a government reach issue, like we just talked about. But that's where I see Psalm 139 as, no, that's a citizen already. You're required to protect that citizen.
I think I shared with you this week, I don't know where it is, but there's some sort of ancient culture that talks about how when they were doing child sacrifices, they banged the drums so loud so that no one could hear the kids screaming. In some ways, that's what our culture does today, right? That's like once we acknowledge this is a life, it's very hard to support ending that life.
Yeah.
Right.
But if we say that's not a life, then you can say, well, if it's a clump of cells or whatever, then it's
so
easier
if you
to
bang
say,
the drums loud,
yeah,
you're
exactly.
saying it. Which kind of leads me to that next question is, for a Christian, I think, and Barry, I'll let you answer, is should this be, we have a lot of one-issue voters, and I'm okay with that. I get it. And we have some people who say, well, no, I kind of, it is an issue, and it's a very important one, but it's not the only one. Where should we land there as Christians? Is there liberty there, you think?
Right. That's a hard one, because
it
it's
is
such
a hard one.
Huge issue. I mean, I think, as we mentioned, I don't think any Christian who reads the Bible, understands the Bible, how we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and how God gave us the gift of life, and it's not something we just throw away or treat haphazardly. Now, I do think the question comes to, again, as you talked about policy, so we can have this idea and understanding from the Bible, but then how does that affect our government policy? And I go back again to the government's role. Is it to protect the individual from their own bad choices, or is it to protect the society, in general? And in this case, abortion, it's protecting one individual from another individual. Does that make sense? Protecting the baby from the mother's decision in that case. And so I think, and it's a huge one, because we're literally talking about, in my eyes, murder, right? You're destroying one human being, not in that human being is innocent from a moral perspective as far as breaking the law. Did they do anything to justify the ending of their life? And I think the answer would be no. And so I could see this as being the big issue, if not the one issue for many voters.
I know for many people in our church, it is the issue, and it is a repulsive issue for many of us. And I think if that's your one issue, that's your one issue. I totally get it. And if it's not, I understand as well. I would encourage you guys, if you have a pro-choice Christian friend, have an honest conversation and listen and ask, not accusatorily, how do you justify that? But listen. And then even if you have a non-Christian friend who is pro-choice, come to a better understanding, because that, honestly, the rest of these topics, I could argue either side of. I really could. I understand both sides. Abortion seems to be one that I continue to struggle what the argument for abortion is. Anyway, let's move on.
I think when Josh says he can argue both sides, you shouldn't send all the email to him, josh@hatemail.com, right?
Yeah, there you go.
I don't think that means he goes to either side. He has a side.
all the rest of these, yes, I could. I think I could, yeah.
All right. I think you're wrong.
I just like to argue, though. Ask anybody that knows me well. Let's move on to immigration. Oh, good. This is an easy one. If we're looking at
don't build the wall.
We're now 6 minutes behind.
Now we're done.
Yeah, really. If we look at some key scriptures from the Old Testament, you certainly see patterns in the Old Testament about maintaining Jewish cultural purity, but the direct commands from God regarding individual foreigners are very different than that. Let's look at one straight from the law, Leviticus 19. When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So even in the midst of God pushing for purity within the culture and the religion, he's telling them, look out for these people who are outsiders. We just saw it in the book of Ruth. And we saw that in Ruth being a Moabite woman. We see this idea throughout the minor prophets to take care of widows, orphans, and aliens or foreigners. You see this pattern again and again in Scripture. And why is this important? Can you think of the guiding principle? Be Imago Dei, that we are created in the image of God. Same thing we just argued for abortion. And so let's just skip to some key questions here. How would you guys say the differing spheres of responsibility factor into this? In other words, what's my personal level? I know when we were talking, when me and you were arguing about immigration, that's what you brought
weren't
up.
arguing, we were discussing.
Disagreeing?
Okay.
Discussing.
I know you're arguing right now.
Over whether or not we were arguing. I remember saying that I would be, I guess I'd call pro-legal immigration. And you said you were too, but you also said that, how did you say it? A lot of the Old Testament commands you thought applied to individuals.
Well, a lot of the Old Testament Levitical commands, again, taken in context.
Well, yeah, I'm saying like the minor prophets that take care of the widows, the orphans, and the foreigners.
Yes.
Those
so
commands.
I think they do apply. So a lot of the commands apply to us personally and as a church. Now, how it impacts our government policy is another thing. Meaning, yes, we as the government, we the people, by the people, kind of for the people, we have power to, influence policies to help those things. And so I think, for me, the key point on immigration is the Bible makes it very clear that we should care for others, right? We are commanded to love others, not just Americans, right, but everyone. But then again, with the prudence aspect, looking at, what are our choices and how do they impact people. When we say love people, it's people on both sides of the border. If I said, hey, God says we should love everyone, open up the borders, let everyone come across. For me, that may not have a big impact living up here in Ohio, right? But think about all the people on the border, the people flooding over. Do those people immediately get access to public education? A lot of the government-funded things, who's paying for that? The influx into those communities, am I being very loving to them, right? So I think we have to love people on both sides. So I'm all for or legal immigration. I do think it needs to be more personal. I think I would love to see a way that we can have more sponsorships, where if you want to, live out the biblical principles in the Bible of caring for those people, is that you sponsor, and maybe this isn't so much financially, but basically allow, speak up for someone from another country, allow them to come, help them assimilate, have regular touch points with them, and allow the government to have a role in that. I will say immigration is a huge issue, and obviously I don't have all the answers to any of these, but I think we need to love each other. And one thing we did talk about too is I think we have to be careful about slogans like build the wall, build the wall. While I'm very much for strong border security, I wouldn't go around chanting that slogan because that doesn't paint the picture of, hey, I care about you on the other side of that wall too. It just says, I don't want you here. Does that make sense?
Totally agree.
You mentioned it, and I mean, Josh and I have had a lot of discussions in his office about issues like this, where there's a lot of, but then what about this? And what about this? And, when we think about, from a policy standpoint, I mean, you just mentioned it, okay, there's an influx of people from another country. Where do they go? How are they taken care of? How does that affect, and then legal immigration, illegal immigration, that sort of thing. It's a very complicated issue. I think it gets back to, and where you land as an individual Christian is really important, right? For absolutely we should take care of the foreigners, but then it goes back to, and then how do you think the government can help that or not? And it's also a reminder to us as Christians that we are all sojourners and exiles in a strange land, right? It's like Josh said, we're citizens of heaven before we're citizens of the United States. And so with all of these issues, I want to warn against idolatry of thinking that, America is the promised land and we are, we need to keep ourselves pure, like the Leviticus law that you read. because we ourselves are a nation of immigrants who came here and are, doing this experiment ourselves. And so it's a really complicated issue for sure.
One thing, too, I want to point out, too, about the government policy. I think we might do better as a government, not so much by helping people immigrate to America, but helping the people where they are. Because if you think about...
I thought you were going to say helping people leave America.
No, just you, Mason. No, just kidding. But no, I mean, seriously, if you think about a lot of people that immigrate in America have the resources to find out the process, people that legally do it. And even people that illegally do it, they have the resources somehow to get here. They have the resources, if they're doing it legally, to go through that whole process. There's a lot of people that live in much worse conditions that don't have the resources to get here. So
And don't know the process.
And don't know the
even by the time they arrive.
Right.
And yet we treat them as criminals. That's the part I have a problem with, but go ahead.
So, but I think we could use a lot of the government influence to help those countries where people are flooding out of and into America to make those countries better.
That's fair.
I mean, I think about Berlin, right? Tear down the wall, when after World War II and how Germany was split in half, and you didn't have people flooding from the west into the east, right? It was the other way around, but they weren't allowed. So I think by helping change that fundamental working of the government,
I'm with you, but
impact.
I don't see that happening. I don't see the legal path being made easier. I feel like sometimes we just condemn. And if I put myself in the shoes of that Guatemalan father that's leaving, to escape organized crime or whatever, the stories Lane has told me from Honduras, the stuff that goes on there, I'd be taking my family heading north too. And so I think sometimes I just wish there was more of a balance. I'm pro border security, all that. I'm against illegal immigration, but I think as Christians sometimes I feel like if we're going to be speaking up for those that have no voice, it should include families that are trying to make better steps. Can we leave it there? Or?
That points to it being a hard issue.
It's a hard
what we've
issue.
been saying.
All of these are hard issues.
Yeah, and you can't just have a slogan and it solves it.
You're exactly right there.
Right.
Yes, yeah. Which one of these last ones you guys want to hit?
Let's go. Let's do it. Let's keep going.
Go on?
Yeah.
Barry, this one's yours.
What?
Gun laws. This is an interesting one for Christians because if you look at the balance between the Old Testament and the New Testament, it is interesting. And so the question here on the table is not should a Christian own guns, but what are the political implications?
Because they should.
Yeah, or else you're no longer an elder. What are the implications of the government deciding if it's right for you or not? That's kind of what we're saying here, and what biblical principles do we see?
Can I read Ecclesiastes? Then
you can read Ecclesiastes.
Go ahead. I'm going to read this verse. I'm going to back out.
Mason really likes this verse.
I think
for
it's
some
so
reason.
funny because it supports both sides of the debate. Ecclesiastes 9: wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. And so the idea there is, obviously it's better to be wise and to resolve situations non-violently. But then you have the person who isn't playing by those rules, and none of the good guys have guns, and the one bad guy has the gun, kind of thing. To me, I just love this verse because each side can cherry pick that if they want to support their point. All right, I'm going to put my mic down on this.
Found this one in Exodus is interesting from the law. If a thief is found breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there shall be no blood guilt for him. There is kind of a biblical Israeli basis for like a stand your ground type thing. So
That'd
you certainly
be more
see
castle
that.
doctrine, but that's all right.
What's that?
That'd be more castle doctrine.
Castle doctrine.
Yeah.
You'll have to explain the difference to me later.
All right.
1 Timothy 5, I think, gives especially us fathers and mothers, if anyone does not provide for his relatives and especially for members of his own household, he's denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. There's a certain degree that I've been charged with the care of my family. And so to what degree is protection part of that? I think that's one of the cases you would make, Barry, not to put words in your mouth. But now let me flip the coin and start to look at the other side of this. Jesus teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. Very challenging. Romans 12 says the same kind of thing. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. And so when it comes to this issue, a lot of you, if you've read Bonhoeffer or anything like that about Christian pacifism, what is the idea of rejecting any kind of pushback? Because really, I mean, we wrote this down as a key question. What is gun ownership for?
For a lot of it's for protection, but not only of self, but of family, and according to the Constitution, I would say it also for the rights and liberty of the people.
I knew you were going to bring the Constitution into this.
Oh, sorry.
We'll get there. You can go there. You can go to the Second Amendment in a second. But it is that idea that it is for protection, and it is to take a life, right? I mean, you don't shoot to maim.
We shoot to stop a threat, and that is actually exactly how we teach, and that's how most people are taught, is you shoot to stop the threat. It's not to end the life. And that threat may be you draw a gun and the person freaks out and runs away, and you stop the threat. Or you may shoot 5 times, they fall on the ground, they still have the gun, and they shoot back. You continue to shoot. So
you see the struggle. You understand the tension, right?
No, yeah, and I do think a lot of it, especially when you're talking about vengeance, that last verse in Romans 12:19, and I do believe this is something, we teach in a lot of the respected gun people, professional gun trainers that I follow and watch and been to, talk about how as a, someone who owns firearms or concealed carry person has to be one of the nicest and most patient people in the world. You really need to work on that, because we never want to go, especially as a Christian, it's never about vengeance or revenge or anything like that. It should always be from a justice and stopping evil kind of perspective. And even the law makes it very clear that, especially within the state of Ohio, each state has different laws, but to use a firearm in self-defense, you have to prove, to be able to claim self-defense successfully, you have to prove 3 things. One, that you didn't start, you were not the initial, the agitator, threw the first punch, whatever started the situation. You have the duty to retreat, meaning you have to just get out of there. You have to answer, why didn't you just leave the situation when it escalated? And the other one, you have to prove that you and most rational people in that situation would have thought that there's serious danger of bodily harm or death, or serious bodily harm or death. So those are things that are law established, and I think they're good laws to basically keep this from going into vengeance.
So I've got no problem with that. Totally within your rights. Totally agree. What do we do with the offender that has the gun that shouldn't? Would gun laws help that? Is there ways that we could balance this?
That's one of the things that I was just thinking when you were talking there is, about being the kindest person. There are some weirdos out there who we would say are not
I'm
kind.
completely fine if the only people that are armed are you, Joe Malargio,
right.
Rick Knoll, and Todd Poling. I feel safe.
Yeah. I don't have any thoughts there. I'm not sure. Again, it speaks to the complicated nature of the issue. And it's also the issue of if someone is a criminal by nature, then are they following the laws that the government puts in place anyway?
Right. And I think myself and most gun owners would be very strict laws against people who do violence or evil with a firearm. But to be honest, I don't think it should matter what the tool is. If someone stabs a person,
It's just that's a very efficient one.
Right, but
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. It's not like, okay, you stabbed someone 15 times and killed them versus you shot them once and killed them. The person with a gun isn't more evil or more in the wrong than the person with the knife. So that's why I'm saying I don't think the tool. But to the point of as far as taking someone away, I think it is okay to basically, if someone is deemed to be unsafe for society, per se, or whatever the term you want to use, and their Second Amendment could be potentially taken away from them. I think the problem we have right now is there's some laws being passed and some laws being passed that take away their due process. And I think that's something that even the Bible talks about, right? You should have 2 or 3 witnesses. You shouldn't be able to just anonymously call and say, hey, this person is a danger to their family and to their community, and then without any kind of investigation or any kind of court hearing.
So to use your own word, you think it's somewhat prudent to have some degree of control?
You mean?
Governmental control on who has a gun and who doesn't.
Oh, well, I think there could be. Now you're putting words in my mouth.
No, I didn't. It's a question. There was a question mark at the end of that.
So, no, I do think that, I think there are times that, they're in the books right now. I mean, felons cannot possess firearms.
And you're okay with that, is what I'm saying.
Yep. I do think that there should be, and there's even other things, I do think there should be a path to get that back. You know, if someone was a felon at 18, committed some crime at 18, had all their rights revoked, maybe by the time they're 40, there should be some process that they could maybe, and I think there is technically supposed to be a process, but it doesn't.
Anything to add to that, Mason?
I would say, and I will put words in Barry's mouth because I think you would agree, is you would probably say that we need more gun education, not less.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about what guns can do, what, how to, even to how to use guns and that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, and I do think that is something that I think there should be a lot more. If the government's going to do anything for gun safety, or gun control, it's about helping educate people on, the safe gun handling, because I think, there's tons of accidents every year. Anyway, so yeah, I do think that. But I think also the Second Amendment is very clear, and even the Supreme Court, has established that according to the Second Amendment, there's an individual right to gun ownership. And, a lot of people throw around the Second Amendment was there to make sure you had guns so you could go hunting or personal defense, but that really wasn't the motivation, and the Supreme Court has upheld that. Even as late as 2008 in, I think it was District of Columbia versus Heller, they agreed that there is the right for individual gun ownership, but the reason behind that was with gun ownership was about basically keeping a tyrannical government in check. Kind of thing.
Let's move on to at least one more topic, and then we'll close. Maybe two, we'll see. Is environmental issues. This is something that comes up in politics as well. I think we want to treat this with more broad strokes than talking specifically about climate change or anything like that. What we're talking about is the idea of what is a biblical viewpoint here for the relationship with our environment. It goes back to really right after the Imago Dei, being created in the image of God. God gives us a charge. Let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. And then in Genesis 2, the Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. And so, honestly, I share these two passages from creation because I think you could claim them that we are stewards of what God has given us. Others have claimed these as, see, God said we can do whatever we want. And so really you can see these as a biblical principle. I would argue that this is part of we were to take care of it because it's God's, not ours. We see that God owns the cows on 1,000 hills. We see in the law that land wasn't supposed to stay somebody's forever because it was God's land. It wasn't an individual's land. And so you see this idea of ownership being God's. But then you also have a counter argument to this that I've heard from a lot of Christian pastors. We find the idea in 2 Peter 3, according to his promise, we are waiting for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. And the argument would be that we're getting a new earth anyway, so it doesn't really matter what we do with this one.
That would be the scorched earth doctrine.
That would be the scorched earth doctrine. I remember the first time I heard that from an individual pastor, and I was shocked that he was making that point. Right. That was, he basically said we can treat it however we want. I personally think that we do need to take care of it. I don't think, well, you had a good way to articulate it. Talk about your balance.
Tell me what I said.
Because he can't remember.
I can put words in your mouth if you want me to.
I would affirm the 2 Peter statement, and I do believe that this earth at the end of time is going to burn and be replaced by a new earth. The problem I have is I don't know when that is, and I have to live here right now. And so,
as do Eliza and Judah,
as do my kids
and their kids.
Yeah. And one thing that's interesting about this, and this goes back to those guiding principles, is I think what I just said we would all agree with. I don't know where we would stand from a policy standpoint, because those big ideas might trickle down into, having the discussion of like you said, climate change. Are humans causing it? Are we not? Can we reverse it? Can we not? You referenced cows on 1,000 hills. I heard that cows are bad for the environment.
That's
so
what
now
I hear.
don't know what to do.
Lots of methane.
Only if they pass. Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
So it's God's fault? Is that what you're saying?
yeah. And I don't
It's
know what to do.
It's just 1,000 cows out there.
Yeah,
and
I
they're
think
They're
flatulent.
his cows. Get them out of here.
I think climate change versus man-made climate change is a whole other discussion we could have. But on the environmental issue, the only thing I want to point out, I think, is that, again, personally, we should take care of, God's
It's stewardship.
Stewardship. I think from the government standpoint, I'm all for the government, again, protecting society. So not allowing companies to dump poisonous stuff into rivers that impact,
You're okay with
thousands.
that?
What? No.
You're okay
the
with
government regulating.
That's what I mean. You're okay with government regulating toxic waste?
Yes.
Okay,
to some degree.
that's bold.
Okay, that is
Kidding.
all right. But here's what I do have issue with is unelected agencies, aka the EPA, right? Passing regulations, basically pseudo laws, without going through again the legislative process. I think.
But what if in that legislative process they were given that power? Because I would argue the Department of Transportation sets laws. We have the IRS sets laws that because they were delegated that power, right? You don't see the EPA there. You have a problem with.
I think
their
I think it'd
overreach?
be nice to have more an advisory. Help me out. Basically, they just advise, because I do think it's good that people analyze those, and we have laws. Actually, there are already a lot of laws, and enforce those laws to protect people. But yeah, this is a tough one. Again, it's one of those things. It's not an easy thing.
I think
do
Mason's
this.
right in that I think all
right.
of us in this room. You just like hearing me say that, don't you? All of us in this room can probably agree. We've been given stewardship, and we need to take care of it. The argument becomes policy.
Yeah, and again, that prudence thing, right?
on-
So what's the impact? Am I saving more lives by, bringing the carbon emission down this much, but then that causes companies to have to jump through a ton of hoops, which causes people to lose jobs, which, so understanding the rolling impact
And I think
as
the
well.
point would be to see the unity in some of this and talk about it that way instead of getting back to the slogans and
Yeah,
things like
exactly.
that.
And I think that's a lot of it, getting to the heart of, hey, we actually might agree that, pollution is bad,
Yeah.
and we need to help protect the people from pollution. So how do we do that?
The one issue that's different about this issue than the other issues we've talked about is that it's not just us as United States citizens and our government that are deciding this issue. It's everybody around the world, which so toss in another factor to
Whole another
complicate
factor,
things
exactly
is-
right. And that is part of the frustration right now is that we can do all we want. If another country is doing something against the environment, we can be as clean as we want, and we're still paying the price, yeah. You guys want to hit this last one or not?
Let's finish it.
Ask.
That's my answer of saying no. I think we should just go.
Skip that one?
I don't care. It's your call.
Let's
do you
let
guys
you
wanna
guys
do? You guys
decide, and then
wanna
you
go?
can.
You wanna
It's
stay?
7:30. You can leave if you need to. The last one we were wanting to look at was racial tension and policing issues. All right, go ahead then. Key scriptures that we've already talked about, some guiding principles here. I would say Imago Dei is in there, and so is the purpose of government. And so really when we get to this, I would argue that you have three completely separate issues here, that the media, that our society is cramming into one thing. If I could separate the issues, and you guys might separate them differently, I think you've got the role of law and order in our society. Second, the idea of racial profiling and whether or not it is happening and whether or not it should. And then third, the use of lethal force, or what I would say is what does a police officer do with a non-compliant individual, regardless of their color or their ethnic background? What do you do with an individual who's non-compliant? And so I think this is a relevant verse. We referenced it earlier in the purpose of government, but let's read Romans 13, just the first 5 verses here. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval, for he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. And so I think that's very pertinent when we read it in light of what's going on in Philadelphia right now, city you've lived in. Just the unrest is that we do have to have law and order, and I think Christians are in favor of that. I think that is a biblical concept for sure. So I think we can agree on that first part of that issue is that the law and order is good, and we need to give police our backing and support them more. Let me move on to the second one, this idea of racial profiling. Does it happen? Does it not? It's almost like this climate change thing. I don't think any one of us being white middle-aged males are qualified to say. And so this is where I would encourage us to listen to our brothers and sisters and hear them. And if I don't know. I'm not saying that it is the case. I'm not saying that it is not the case. I think it's very clear in Scripture that we're not to prejudge. We're not to judge people based on how they look. James 2, verse 1, my brothers, show no partiality as you hold faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory. And then verse 9, but if you show partiality, you're committing sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors. I think Christian position is obvious there too. We are against people being profiled based on how they look. That the word there, partiality in Greek, literally means face judging. That you're judging a situation, you're judging a person just simply based on how they look. Is there a way that Christians can say Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter? And I think there is, and I think that is our position, that we are for law and order, but if this is happening, we want it to stop, so we're listening to those and trying to judge what it's like to walk in their shoes. And when I say Black Lives Matter, I literally mean that, not the political slogan that means 100 other different things. I mean, do we believe that people, regardless of their color, have worth? Yes, Imago Dei, right? And so we need to be praying for this situation and continue to look at this situation. Feel free to add, guys. I spoke my piece.
I mean, like all the issues, obviously a deeply complicated issue with a deeply complicated history in this country, right? And I've been pulled over for driving. Obviously, you, the speeder, have been pulled over for driving.
It's been a very long time. Thank you very much.
I'm about
that was in my youth.
I'm about once every 4 years for some reason.
It's been 20 years for me. I'm proud.
Nice.
And so, I don't know what it's like to be pulled over for no reason, because of the color of my skin. And yet I also don't believe that every black person gets pulled over because of the color of their skin, right? And similarly, are there bad police officers who prejudge and use excessive force with their guns to merge two issues together here? Certainly. But that also doesn't mean that every police officer is, a racist who wants to fire their gun and kill someone.
Yeah, there's no doubt. It's the far minority. But
again,
no doubt about that.
Because the world we live in, that's so charged right now, it's like you have to be all the way over here or all the way over here. And I think the Christian position is to try to be the honest position and say it's more complicated than that. And maybe I don't exactly fit into either of these right here, but.
I would say, too, that, I'm a big fan of law and order, and I don't think it exists. Huh? Sorry. Yeah.
The show.
Yeah. But I don't know how we have it without a way to enforce the laws, right? And that is what the police are there. So I think it's very critical that we do have a police force out there. And I do think, Mason, when you were talking about, I don't know what it's like to be pulled over for no reason, obviously the assumption is there that happens, but you also made the clarification that it lots of times it doesn't happen. I will say I've also never been in the shoes of a police officer when I'm issuing commands to someone who maybe, have been told that they've had weapons charges before, and this person is non-compliant, and you're not sure if you're 2 seconds away from being shot. I've never been in those shoes either. Does that make sense? And I do think, as far as, a lot of people talking about, well, things need to change, I think most even law enforcement would probably agree, and I'd like to hear from some that we do have in here later. I think something we could do is more de-escalation training.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Each law, a lot of these sheriffs and police departments have very small funding and they have to think about, where do we put our training? Where do we do that? And so a lot of it's tough choices, and so they can't train in all the things, really well. And a lot of that is what we call verbal judo or de-escalation trainings. How do you use your words to de-escalate a situation? But at the same time, I think we need to, as parents, as citizens, I've trained my kids, hey, if the police are completely wrong and they pull you over and tell you to do something, even if they want to arrest you for something you didn't do, go along with it. You can fight it in court, right? That's how our system works. So I think if people were more educated, hey, the police can make mistakes, right? But the more you disagree in the moment, the more likely you are to escalate it, right? And I think also the better trained police are in de-escalating those situations, the less violent encounters we may have. But it's a two-way street. There's responsibility on both sides.
I just wish, politically speaking, we could have an honest conversation
Right.
about what's happening instead of making this slogans and reducing it to some situation. It's a tough political climate we live in, and I would pray that Christians wouldn't fall into that, but would be walking that middle hard line, trying to pull both sides together and saying, look, I'm listening to my African American brothers and sisters who say it's hard, and I can't say if it is or not. But I'm also recognizing what it's like to be a police officer and trying to deal with a non-compliant individual. I can't even imagine, like you said, and that threat of being shot.
I was thinking three sort of Christian ideals: honesty, love, and listening. What you just said are things that we don't have right now as a society, that if we had those things, we might not be where we are right now. But neither side, politically or of this debate, want to listen to the other side. The other side's always wrong, I'm always right, that sort of thing. And are not honest about what's happening or what, and aren't loving. The other side is the enemy. And so I need to defeat them. And those, to me, aren't Christian ideals, and it's tricky to not fall into those.
Very difficult. We had a lot more issues that we cut out for tonight. We don't. Yeah, if we wanted to do this again, we'd really like you doing it with each other, with us. I mean, we just don't know how to do this with 30 people. The idea here tonight was to try to say these are issues we can talk about, and we can talk about honestly. I don't know about you guys, but I did feel tension. Even as we're talking about this, I'm wondering, what does such and such think, or what is Barry going to say, and why do we feel that tension around Christian brothers and sisters? We shouldn't. We should be able to talk through these issues biblically, prayerfully, critically, and lovingly, and really think through these ideas as we consider what does it mean for us to cast a vote when it comes to these issues. Maybe some of you are one-issue voters, and none of the rest of what we talked about past abortion matters to you, that's the only issue. And that's fine. If that's what the Holy Spirit has put on your heart, then God bless you. Do it. Maybe some of you are the other direction, or maybe some of you just want to think through policies. All of this is good. Let us make just a closing thought each. What I wanted to say was, I already had this closing thought in mind before I even came tonight, was the idea that, so as a part of this exercise in preparing for this, we didn't know what everybody was going to say, but we did want to know basically where each of us stood on an issue, and so we had to articulate our position within the shared Google Doc that we had, and they were remarkably close. I don't know how many, what do you want to call them, discussions me and you have gotten in over the years. And we have fun. We love sparring back and forth, and it's a good time. And, I assumed he wanted a gun in every toddler's hands. And, and I think he assumed I wanted an immigrant in every town. And open borders, no more borders, one world government. And both were wrong, right? We found out that we're almost identical positions, but what we often end up doing is arguing about this little tiny bit that we disagree on, and that creates division. And so I hope we can get past that. The other thing I noticed is a lot of this is determined by, we have a choice on what it is that we talk about. We talked about slogans, whether it's Build the Wall or Black Lives Matter. And if we keep repeating these things and they mean things to other people, that's not discourse, that's not discussion. It doesn't work that way. And so may we start to watch what we choose to talk about, and instead of being, let me just say, on the anti-illegal immigration side versus the pro legal immigration side, that I'm for immigrants. I'm for people. You know, I want to see people thrive, whether that's in their own country or in mine, you know, that kind of thing. We need to watch what it is we choose to voice. And so I think the last one was a desire to be right and to win instead of seeking humility and unity is clearly not a Christian ideal, is it? Our idea is to be humble and listen to others. Closing thoughts?
John Wesley, from his journal, October 6, 1774.
Leave it to Mason to close with a quote on Wednesday night.
It's very short, though, compared to usual. He said, I met those of our society who had voted in the ensuing election and advised them, number 1, to vote without fee or reward for the person they judged most worthy. Number 2, to speak no evil of the person they voted against. And number 3, to take care their spirits were not sharpened against those that voted on the other side. Honestly, to me, that's how I feel right now, a week away from the most important election in American history. I don't care about whether who you vote for. You know, you can go through and decide for yourself, as we've been talking about, and you have to make a choice between two flawed options. That's always the case. I care less about who you vote for. I care more about how you treat the people who voted differently than you. And recognizing that if your candidate doesn't win next week, that the world's probably not going to end. At some presidential election, that will be wrong. But it's, you know, there's no indication that it's going to be this one. And, you know, the church will continue to be the church, and we as individual Christians continue to be individual Christians, whether the person we want to be in office is in office or not. These things have a tendency to go back and forth anyway with a two-party system, but the church doesn't change and we don't change as individual Christians. The commands to us to love one another don't change. That's what I'm trying to remind myself of. That's where my hope is in. That's what I'm resting in. You know, I can root a certain way next Tuesday, certainly, but my life doesn't end if that person loses.
I would just kind of going on with Josh's point, the fact that I think we need to be very careful about putting people in a box or putting them in a side without having the discussion with them, right? So understanding their point of view. And I think without that, we have no hope of changing things. I think as Christians, yes, we should be involved in politics, just as we should be involved and live out our Christian morals, whether it's in business, in the church, in every sphere of influence that we have, we should live out our Christian principles. So yes, we should be involved in politics, we should vote. But I think we're going to make a bigger impact on our country by changing the hearts and minds of individuals for Christ than by getting them to align with us on a specific political issue. Now, political issues are important and lots to align, but I think we have to be careful about elevating those over bringing someone to Christ. I think that's a huge thing. Also, if certain people get elected in this next election and they pass the gun laws that they want, I just want them to let them all know that I had a tragic boating accident and most of my guns got lost in the bottom of a lake.
What were you saying about Christian honesty?
Or they will be.
Thank you guys for participating. Thank you guys for listening. If you're like me and I was sitting out there, your pump is primed and you want to talk some. If that's the case, I encourage you to do that, either with us or maybe you have a complaint or a particular issue that we didn't talk about. I mean, there's a litany of issues we could have talked about. Again, our purpose was to hopefully model that this is possible to do civilly. We didn't have heavy disagreement, but we do have some on the way that things are said, the way that policy works out. And that's okay, because Jesus Christ is our King, right? No matter who wins next Tuesday, Christ is still our King, and we serve him. So let's close in a word of prayer. God, thank you for this time tonight. I pray that it was fruitful for somebody, that maybe we learned a couple things about the ability to discuss political matters with especially Christian brothers and sisters who we trust serve you. And so, God, help us to go from this place, first of all, walking in love, but then also I pray that you give us wisdom and discernment for if we haven't already voted. I know probably half this room has already voted. But God, I pray that you'd continue to lead, guide, and direct us in that area, and help us to trust that you are in control, just like we'll talk about this Sunday. It's in Jesus' name we pray these things. Amen. Hope to see you guys Sunday. God bless.